You are at war with yourself and likely don't realize it. Your thoughts, beliefs, habits, and actions often sabotage you. Are they helping you overcome adversity or setting you up for failure? To win this battle, you must connect with your inner warrior. We all have a warrior within us, one that strengthens our resolve and helps us to rise to meet life's challenges. If you're just surviving rather than thriving, then it's time to embrace the warrior archetype, live the warrior ethos, and ascend. If you are a veteran, first responder, or someone looking to take charge of your life, find your tribe, and then be the hero of your own story, this podcast is for you. Join Mike Kinney and Matt Hastings, two retired U.S. Army officers who served in U.S. Army Special Operations and Army Aviation units, as they share with you optimal performance practices they learned in their time with the Military and Warriors Ascent, a 501c3 nonprofit that helps veterans and warriors with PTS.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Warriors Ascent podcast with your hosts, Matt and Mike. And we are season 2, episode 5. This is thinking critically, critical thinking, quality and clarity of thought. And what we're going to reference is the miniature guide to critical thinking, concepts and tools by Dr. Richard Paul and Linda Elders. So some backstory there. These are some of the materials that they used with us when I was in the Commander General Staff College as a major. I found them to be very, very useful, very, very applicable, and bringing it back to, I'll say, previous lessons and the overarching framework of what it is that we're trying to achieve here. We talk from healing to high performance. We talked about clarity of thought and thinking in as much as it relates to cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Your thoughts drive your emotions, drive your actions, limiting beliefs, things of that nature. Cognitive distortions, which obviously affect perception and things of that nature. What we'll talk about today is a little bit more high order. So this would fall into the realm of high performance, really trying to enhance quality of thought, et cetera, et cetera. So the intellectual standards. So starting out, let me ask this. So people talk about critical thinking, logic and reasoning, but what constitutes all of the above? So we can talk in generalities and things of that nature, but what does it really look like? Right? So how do you conceptualize critical thinking to discipline your thoughts and your reasoning skills? Wouldn't it be nice if we could reduce critical thinking into its constituent parts and also apply some standards by which the quality of your thought could be measured? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, you're in luck, because that is what we'll talk about in this lesson today, in this episode. So we'll start with elements of thought, and I'll bring it back to you, Matt, because one of the first things I thought about when I looked at this list of elements was the military decision-making process and all the planning that we have to do in the military, and how much of the operations orders or O plans, con plans, or whatever it might be, by and large, I'll say, had as its components, elements of this purpose, information, data, the question or the problem at hand, the tactical or operational problem, et cetera, et cetera. So with that being said, what's your experience?
Well, for me, so I came at it as a helicopter pilot, an assault helicopter pilot. So I'm going to bring troops to an objective at an exacting time. And in order to do that, we have to go through this whole process. But throughout my career, I was always at the level where we executed the tip of the spear, and the planners, which a lot of times I was part of, or cells of the planning, and maybe I'm just thinking inside of one box. Maybe I'm just drawing routes to the objective area and alternate routes or something like that. But as time got going and I got more senior, I became flight lead. When you became that person, you and the commander had to get right in each other's pocket to understand the higher order of stuff, to understand, what is the bigger objective?
That's exactly it.
What is the bigger intent? What is that next level commander thinking in the event that something goes wrong while we're going that we didn't think of, even though we're going to think of a bunch of contingencies, something still would happen and we could make actions occur that would still get us towards the objective or finalizing the outcome we want. And I think, like the way I developed that was through courses of action, and I needed something fast. And I would be in the first helicopter and somewhere in the third helicopter, and usually 5 helicopters in a row, right?
That's right.
The commander's back in the third. And I would need to know something now. And so I'd give him 3 options every time. So it was the 3 courses of action. And I kind of did this as a salesman. I did one where I really wanted it to be the one I wanted.
One was a throwaway.
Yeah. One was
and the other was a
throwaway.
hybrid, right?
One was like, I'll take
typical.
it. I don't really want this one, but I'd take it. That would work, But now, like, I need to know now. So I'd usually get what I wanted because the way I'd sell it or something, somebody's usually, the commander might have some piece of information I didn't know about and give me another direction or something like that. But it was imperative in timing and everything and to maintain that critical thinking rather than the whole, oh no time frame and like, the delays in thinking, and like to have that critical, already kind of pre-mapped out idea that just had a space that we're going to, and I can flex on my way to it if I have to. I think it was what was important about the military decision-making process. So I walked away with that in my life too. And it was kind of drove people a little bit nuts, but I still kind of do the 3 courses of action thing, in a lot of parts of my life, and I kind of do the same thing. This is kind of what I'm going for. This is one I take, and then the throwaway.
Yeah, no, 3 COAs, as we used to say. But no, you've talked about a few different things. There's some of which we'll get to with this, but whether it's called commander's intent, that's, when I was in, and then a little bit later on, it kind of evolved into, mission command. And
Right.
what that's all about is, well, the plan or the commander, they may have in their mind how it is the mission will be accomplished, tactical tasks and things of that nature. It's never too prescriptive in that, hey,
Right.
in the end, if the plan goes to heck, and what's the the military adage, no plan survives first contact.
Yeah.
That, as long as you could accomplish the mission, the intent, the commander's intent, and even if you've got to deviate from the original plan, hey, so be it. But always go, always come to the table with a plan. But applying these, speaking to these elements of thought in as much as they relate to, our planning process, and quite frankly, beyond that, right? So purpose, goals, and objectives, right? So any thought, any argument, any theory or hypothesis, right? Assertion, anything that you're going to posit as, all right, hey, I'm going to make this, I'm going to try to make this argument or whatever it might be. Again, positive theory, a working hypothesis. In business, could be a multitude of things. There has to be goals and objectives associated with that. So I mentioned that, the tactical, or operational problem at hand. What is it that you're solving?
Right. Exactly.
Because without that, you're just pontificating. What's the purpose behind, all of that logical thought and reasoning? You're solving a problem. Next is the question or the issue at hand, right? The problem or the issue, right? So clearly, all right, well, what is it that we're doing? In your case, I need to move men, weapons, and equipment onto the objective in order to, whatever it might be,
Right.
seize a piece of terrain, I know you were in a gunship guy, you were, Black Hawk guy, but, for the gunship aviators, saturating an objective, suppression, whatever it might be.
Right.
But the issue at hand, what is it that you're doing, right? So next, information. So I'll say MDMP parlance, facts bearing on the problem, assumptions, limitations, and constraints. All ways of framing the problem with, here's what we know, right? Here's what we can count on. Here's what we have at our disposal. The assumptions were a little different. Here's kind of what we don't know, but we're going to make assumptions
We're going to speculate
that are both valid and necessary. And that was always the criteria. You don't make assumptions just for no reason. You make assumptions in order to continue planning while maybe not necessarily having the information required to continue that plan. So your assumptions would both have to be necessary. Hey, I need to make this assumption in order to plan appropriately, but valid, in that you're not just making stuff up. I mean, again, with an assumption you can't possibly know, but it can't be just the enemy's going to lay down their weapons and give up. That would be an invalid assumption, so I wouldn't count on that. No, exactly. So interpretation and inference. And I think, you can see that in the military. You can see that, in politics, in the news. People will throw facts up, data, whatever it might be, and say, hey, this is clear proof of whatever. Quite frankly, it's all open to interpretation. So I'd say,
right, in perspective.
In many regards, people don't even go that far. They won't speak to data or facts or anything like that. Observations, experience, evidence, any sort of evidence or artifacts. They just say, hey, I feel this, and hence it makes it true, which is super faulty. I'd say next to that is the interpretation of those facts. And that's, I think, where things go awry as well. How is it that you interpret that data, and then extrapolating it? What does it really mean, right? So that, I think, is another, important aspect, so that interpretation and inference that you draw from those conclusions, very important as well. Concepts, theories, definitions, laws. So the military, we've got a variety of them, right? So, what is it? The principles of war: mass, offensive, maneuver, right? The acronym MUSMAS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
This is how we're going to do it. Yeah.
Right. All geared towards, I'll say, disciplining your mind to account for these different, I'll call them theories, in the application of forces and combat power and whatever it might be. But theory often informs action. But at the same time, taking, I'll say, a theoretical abstraction and then applying it concretely, right? Like, all right, hey, theoretically, you could talk about counterinsurgency as an example, winning hearts and minds. Okay, how do you go about that? That's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
But having your actions or your theory, whatever it might be, informed by theory is very important as well. So those concepts, those definitions, those laws and principles that you abide by, that'll say govern your planning, your actions, are very important. And I'll speak for the military. A lot of them are I'll say, codified in doctrine, best practices that, over centuries, if not millennia, we've seen in warfare, again, massing on the objective, maneuver, in terms of being able to move around the battle space, et cetera, et cetera. Do they apply in every situation? No, not all the time. But I think those that can apply those best will fare best.
What I think is interesting about all of this makes me be very mindful of solutions at all times. Like, if I try to apply these kind of concepts into my life, it all, for some reason, just makes me feel solutions driven. Like I'm always trying to solve a problem. And if I attack everything like that, it just keeps order for my thinking, actually. Like if I do have big problems, I have a method to go towards it,
Being solution focused.
Yeah.
Versus, problem focused. Problem definition is very important. But
yeah, that's what I mean. I go through all these steps, and to me, this is the MDMP. What is the situation? What's the problem I got to solve?
Mm-hmm.
What are my players? What are my enemy? What's the terrain?
Mm-hmm.
What time? What's weather? What's, all the things I need to look at. I can look at all these things. What are the implications? What's the data? What's the emotions? All the things, and kind of just put it all together and figure out, what am I going to do with this? How can I move forward to solve whatever is going on?
That's absolutely right. So military decision-making process really is nothing more than, was it 13 steps, right?
Yeah.
And a codification of problem-solving process, for lack of a better description.
Yeah, it's a great process.
Right. Tried and true. And, there may be people that are like, all right, hey, we'll dissect this problem on our own. But in true military fashion, they try to structure your thinking, not to be formulaic and lockstep necessarily. They used to say in SAMs, Be a master of the process. Don't be mastered by the process. Meaning, if you've got to deviate, but you know why you're deviating, well, then so be it.
Exactly.
What I like about it is it really structures your thinking in a productive way. That's one. Number two, especially in the military, we can talk about this in terms of individual, right, quality of thought. But for planning, what you're trying to do in essence is give people a common framework from which to work so that everyone's logic and reasoning is disciplined, or you're working off the same sheet of music, the same standards, which is why, some people, maybe that are not military go, oh my God, typical military guys. They've got, the 1 step, 2 steps, 3 step, very, very mechanistic, very lockstep and very structured and inflexible. Well, not necessarily.
No.
Number one, number two, there's some benefits to that. Because the antithesis of that is what we see resident in society today,
Pure chaos,
where there's no quality of thought. It's all emotions and feelings, devoid of any facts or theory or historical precedent, or has this ever worked in the past, or have we seen anything like this in the past, and how has it worked out? And that in large measure is what a lot of military doctrine is predicated on: is, hey, we've seen this before and it has not worked out well, or the opposite. We've done this before, and this has worked quite well for us. So while we're not going to be too doctrinaire, and lack, I'll say, the contextualization of this. However, if it's worked in the past, why don't we have that as our going in proposition, and then deviate from there where applicable. So that's what I like about it. Mm-hmm. So, assumptions, as we've mentioned before, right? Valid and necessary. There are tons of unknowables. And if you're paralyzed by the notion that you can't know everything, you're never going to take action. So there are always instances where you've got to make assumptions, but at the same time, you need to be able to justify them. Like, all right, hey, this is, again, valid and necessary, but valid in as much as, could this in fact be the case, or am I completely out of left field? And a lot of times, again, it's that historical precedent that you fall back on and say, I don't have all the facts, but this very much looks like something we've seen in the past. It's that saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Well, that might inform some of your assumptions based on, again, historical precedent. Implications and consequences. Again, another thing that, I see resident all the time is second and third order effects. All right, if you make this decision, what are the potential consequences? Oh, everything's going to work out famously or perfectly. Or what might be some of the other things? And we could all tell a million stories of, oh, we didn't see that coming. Or, case in point, bringing it back to, the military. I think a lot of people think when we went into the Middle East, Iraq and Afghanistan, that people would embrace democracy. Who doesn't want to be free, right? So, and have a say-so in their lives and agency and a variety of other things. And what we found, the consequences of that, and, some faulty assumptions, number one. Number two, the consequences are that didn't really work out all that well when you're trying to foist upon, a certain culture
and society,
governmental structure that, culturally they're not well suited to.
Right.
And we bear the consequences for that. And then I'm not going to get all political, but we see a lot of political decisions that, quite frankly, many people are like, well, we know what's going to happen. We can see what's coming. And a couple years later, next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, crime's up and this and that. Really? Okay. No one said those are called consequences. You'd be well served to, at least in your mind, conceptualize that this might happen rather than, oh my God, I never saw that coming.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Again, so that gets back to, my contention that our quality of thought today is lacking. And then lastly, point of view, and this is an interesting one too. In that everyone's got a bias, conservative versus liberal, and there's obviously more than that. There's religious, there's, background, there's a multitude of things. But if you're really going to discipline your thought and be an honest broker, I'll say, you've got to entertain other people's points of view and their perspective from where they've come from. And you may not embrace it. You may not really deep down say, oh, hey, I agree with that. But if you can at least entertain that and say, okay, their perspective based on, because what do they say? Where you sit is where you stand, right?
Right.
Same thing. Okay, hey, this is what I think their stance would be based on the way they were brought up. Were you brought up rich, middle class, poor? That's a different perspective.
I always kind of like that in the big briefings we would attend, and the ST would stand up and play the enemy role and act and think as the enemy and brief like they're the enemy and actually speak. I'm going to do these actions to you. And it's like that's a great example. Like red teaming, blue force, for those that don't know, are the good guys. Red force, red team, that's the bad guys. But please, continue with that line of thought. Yeah. So a good red team will say, hey, I see what you're doing. This is what I'm thinking. Yeah. And this is what I'm going to do, much to the chagrin of the planners that are like, oh man, I didn't think of that. But I didn't think of that. And it's like, that's the whole point, is where are the holes in our plans? Where, how will other things like society and civilians on the battlefield, what are those things that could be, major? Like, is there a political thing? Is there somehow we can be set up on video camera? Like, I remember a couple times when it was, hey, don't fly anywhere near Baghdad today. Like, what? Like, we fly across Baghdad all the time. It's like, well, we're kind of afraid today that they're going to use video as propaganda and say that it was something else, and kind of gaslight people so that was pretty interesting orders those days, and we'd just steer clear of areas. And so there was a lot of different
based on point of view and perception.
Yeah. And they can use that very easily, because it's happening all over the news right now. Not sure which perspective to listen to, because just being like, who's telling the right truths right now? It's really difficult thing to go through and try to drop emotions and be critical thinker to figure out, like, man, who should I be supporting right now and what's going on in all these events.
Oh, so you bring up another point that we could really break down, but point of view and somebody's intent, the intent behind what it is that they're saying, is not to be discounted as well. Like somebody's perspective, there's a reason, there's a motive, behind what people say or what they don't say or the way they interpret things based on that point of view. So
anymore, it's like how long it took them to do a tweet means something. It's like, wow, there's so many nuances.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. So we'll move on very quickly to universal intellectual standards. So I'll say somewhat related, but so making arguments and assertions properly. So clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, logic, and then fairness. And we'll speak to each of these. So clarity, it's the prerequisite for assessing the other standards, right? And an example would be, what can be done about education in the US? Well, that lacks a lot of clarity. If you're going to, ask the question, like, well, what specifically do you mean? That is such an amorphous, large problem. If you're really going to go and structure an inquiry or whatever it might be, or make an assertion, that there's a lot to be said there. Is it good? Is it bad? What's to be done? What do you mean? Is it good? Is it bad? What specifically? Versus something like, the U.S. educational system is faltering because we don't have common standards that can be applied all throughout each individual school, particularly in the areas of mathematics and STEM. And then, okay, now you've got something more to work with. You've got something that you can at least all agree on, terms of reference, right? And you're all speaking to the same thing. It by and large, we all know the problem at issue, the issue at hand. But when it's so nebulous and vague, when it lacks that clarity, it's much harder to argue about. People are talking past one another. Next is accuracy, right? Trueness. Can what you're saying be validated or confirmed? And that's where people are like, well, everyone thinks this. Who's everyone?
Right.
And what
I don't
do they
think that. Yeah, right.
I don't think that.
Yeah.
Or most people, is that 51%? Is that 75%? Is that, what is that? And then precision, I'll say somewhat related. People conflate accuracy and precision. Accuracy is really more the trueness. Hey, is this true or not? Precision is geared more towards, I'll say how, I don't want to use the same word, precise, but as it says, specificity, detail, granularity, like rather than making a generality, okay, let's really neck down, as I kind of mentioned before. Is it 35%? Is it 10%? Is it, versus, the majority. Okay, the majority can be 51% or it can be 99 or 100%.
Right,
I mean, there's no real granularity there in terms of precision. Relevance is the other one. Relevance is where people will bring up an issue that has nothing to do with what it is that you're arguing. And we see that all the time. I mean, I'll say gun control or gun violence, and the assault rifles, you can also say, hey, red herring too. But it's like, okay, how many people annually are killed by, assault rifles versus knives versus guns versus car accidents? Well, is that really, I mean, you can argue relevance, but it's like, is that really, is that relevant to the issue at hand in terms of, we'll say gun deaths? I would submit to you that there are more gun deaths by pistol as an example. Not to speak about, a polarizing issue, but that is an example where
I think
the relevance is kind of.
I think people in arguments now, they pull this one on you all the time and pull something that's not relevant because you're maybe giving too many facts or winning the argument. So they say, well, this happened. And you're like, oh, what does that have to do with this?
Well, I mean, that's the red herring, or the straw man is the other one, where they'll present your argument a weak one at that, inappropriately. It's like, that is not my argument at all, but that's a one that you can relate to it and tear it down easily. No, absolutely.
I used to have flight students do that to me all the time when I would ask them, hard questions, and they'd be like, I don't know the answer to that, but here's a whole bunch of stuff I did study. And it's like, good job on that, but I'm not asking you that.
Exactly. That's not relevant to keeping this aircraft. I'm never going to
ask you that.
to keeping this aircraft aloft.
Right.
The other one's, depth and breadth. You want enough depth. You want enough information on a particular topic. It shouldn't be just superficial, right? A micron deep, right? But then correspondingly, depth, you should have a wide swath of knowledge with regard to a particular topic. And that may encapsulate, various other arguments, or, other data points or whatever. But that's not, I'll say, so much cherry picking the data set as it is, okay, I'm going to give a treatment of, a broad body of knowledge and come to what I feel to be the best conclusion. Logic, right? Really nothing more than, do you have facts and assertions, right? And do your facts substantiate those assertions? Does A plus B equal C?
You're out.
Or are you throwing up a bunch of stuff and saying, and clearly this leads to this conclusion, and you're like, and it's what do they call it? A non sequitur, right? It does not follow. I don't see how you got from here to there. That's not a good argument. That's not logical. Your data and argumentation doesn't lead us to a logical conclusion. People just throw up a big smoke screen of irrelevant facts and figures. And then lastly, fairness. So fairness, in as much as entertain the other argument, and take it on its merits. And a good argument will I'll say, look at someone else's points and lend credence to that, but then be able to argue against it, but they've done due diligence in that they at least understand the basic facets or framework of the other argument and are able to say, and here's your argument, I get it, and here's why I don't believe that, and here's facts that then corroborate or substantiate. Right? So in the end, just to kind of sum up real fast, key takeaways: what constitutes critical thinking? Well, my thoughts are, right, the elements of thought that we mentioned, and then also universal intellectual standards that we've outlined. We'll have them in the show notes. And that way you can look at them. And also I'll invite everyone's attention to, this little book here, which is The Miniature Guide to Critical Thinking, Concepts and Tools, again, by Dr. Richard Paul and Dr. Linda Elder. And they've got a variety of ones: Fallacies, The Art of Mental Trickery and Manipulation, a variety of really great little pamphlets that I'll say are great resources to discipline your thinking.
I know another goal that people should have, and that's to help us grow this thing. So hit like and share and help us grow our podcast.
We appreciate that, brother. All right, man. We'll see you.
Hi, Matt Hastings here, sending a thank you for watching this episode of the Warriors Ascent podcast. We strive to build a community of warriors made up of our nation's veterans and first responders. And to reach as many of those in need as possible, we need your help. Please just smash that like button and comment or share our content. Warriors Ascent is a Kansas City-based nonprofit that aids veterans and first responders with PTS. I went through this effective program and want those that are struggling to find what I found. Check us out on our website at warriorsascent.org.